What would you do if the man you trusted most humiliated you when you needed him most? Imagine being pregnant, crying at his mistress's feet. Sounds unbearable, right? Trust me, this story will shock you. Stay with me, like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The ballroom glittered like 1,000 stars trapped in crystal chandeliers. Every corner of the hall was draped in opulence. Velvet curtains, golden candelabras, and a polished marble floor that reflected the movements of Manhattan's wealthiest elite. Laughter, music, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses created an atmosphere of triumph. Tonight was supposed to be the pinnacle of success for Richard Langford, a self-made millionaire who believed the city was his playground. He stood at the center of it all, basking in the glow of admiration, his arm wrapped around a woman who was not his wife. That woman was Vanessa Reed, 26, ambitious and stunning in a scarlet gown that hugged her figure like a lover's embrace. She leaned into Richard's side, whispering jokes into his ear as guests glanced over, some with envy, others with disgust. But Richard didn't care. For months, he had paraded Vanessa through Manhattan's exclusive circles as though she were a trophy he had earned. What mattered most to him was the attention. He thrived on it, the same way he thrived on business deals and risky gambles. Near the edge of the ballroom, unnoticed by most, a heavily pregnant woman struggled to keep her composure. Her name was Evelyn Langford, Richard's wife. At 6 months along, she should have been at home resting, safe and cherished, but instead she found herself standing alone in a room full of strangers, watching the man she had sacrificed everything for embrace another woman as though Evelyn no longer existed. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small purse against her swollen belly. The soft satin of her pale blue gown, chosen carefully so she could still look elegant despite her condition, felt suddenly cheap, invisible in the flood of sequins and couture swirling around her. Evelyn had not been invited to this gala. She had discovered it by accident, reading about Richard's business event in the society pages, only to recognize Vanessa's name on the guest list. Her heart had told her something was wrong for weeks, but tonight it was confirmed with brutal clarity. She moved slowly toward the center of the room, each step a battle between pride and desperation. The music swelled, the orchestra's violins weaving through the laughter. Her breath came shallow, her baby shifting inside her as though sensing the storm of emotions tearing her apart. When she reached Richard, her voice shook. "Richard," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "Why are you doing this?" The room hushed. Whispers spread like wildfire. Cameras turned, flashbulbs igniting in bursts of light. The millionaire's pregnant wife had walked into his perfect evening, and there would be no way to hide it. Richard stiffened, his jaw clenching, but before he could respond, Vanessa laughed. "Oh, darling," Vanessa said mockingly, her eyes sparkling with cruel delight. "You really shouldn't wear yourself out chasing after him. Look at you, you're exhausted, pale. Maybe it's better if you just sit quietly at home where you belong." Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Evelyn's knees threatened to buckle as humiliation surged through her body. But Richard did nothing. He didn't defend her. He didn't silence his mistress. Instead, he tightened his arm around Vanessa's waist, as though making his choice in front of the world. Tears blurred Evelyn's vision. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her voice caught in her throat. The weight of betrayal was heavier than anything she had ever carried. She sank to her knees, not from choice, but because her body gave way beneath the crushing force of shame and heartbreak. Around her, guests whispered in hushed tones. Some turned away out of discomfort, others leaned closer, eager to devour the scandal. Evelyn's sobs filled the silence, raw and unrestrained, her tears falling onto the polished marble floor at the feet of her husband's mistress. Vanessa tilted her chin high, savoring the moment as if she had won a battle. Richard glanced down at his wife, his expression cold. "You're embarrassing yourself," he muttered through clenched teeth, low enough that only Evelyn and Vanessa could hear. "Get up and go home before you ruin everything." But Evelyn couldn't rise. She was paralyzed by grief, betrayed by the man she thought would protect her forever. For years, she had believed in his dreams, supported his ambitions, and carried his child. Now she realized the bitter truth. She had been nothing but a stepping stone, discarded once he reached the heights he craved. Suddenly, cameras flashed again, brighter this time, as journalists who had been lingering near the entrance pushed forward to capture every detail. The image of a millionaire's pregnant wife weeping at his mistress's feet was too explosive to ignore. In seconds, the scandal would be splashed across tabloids, trending online, and whispered in every boardroom in Manhattan. Evelyn's tears blurred her vision, but she felt the stares piercing her like knives. Her world spun, her chest tightening, the baby kicking inside her as though begging her to fight. For a fleeting moment she considered staying down, surrendering to the humiliation. But deep within her, a spark ignited, a memory of her father's words she hadn't thought of in years. "Evelyn," he used to say, "never let anyone treat you as less than what you are. You have my blood in your veins, the blood of a leader, not a beggar." Her father, Charles Donovan. The name was whispered in every financial circle, feared in every courtroom. The CEO of Donovan Global Holdings, one of the most powerful men in America. Evelyn had tried to live apart from his shadow, to build a life based on love rather than power. But tonight, as she knelt on the cold floor, she realized something devastating. Richard had forgotten who she truly was. Her tears slowed. She drew a shaky breath, her fingers brushing her belly as if to promise her unborn child that this wasn't the end. Around her, the whispers grew louder, but Evelyn's eyes hardened with resolve. She wasn't broken. Not yet. And Richard Langford had no idea that before dawn, the man he had underestimated, the father-in-law he had mocked behind closed doors, would arrive to remind him that no one humiliates a Donovan without consequences. What Richard didn't know was that by sunrise he would be the one on his knees. Not in love, not in triumph, but in the cold judgment of a courtroom. Evelyn Donovan had not grown up in the glittering world she now found herself trapped in. She was born into it. Yes, the daughter of Charles Donovan, the ruthless CEO whose company shaped skylines and controlled boardrooms from New York to Singapore. But from the time she was a child, Evelyn's mother, Margaret, had fought to shield her from the harsh glare of power. Margaret insisted on raising her daughter with humility, compassion, and a sense of normalcy. While her classmates at private school flaunted designer handbags and luxury cars, Evelyn was dropped off in a modest family sedan and wore second-hand clothes from consignment shops. Her father had agreed to the illusion, if only to keep peace with his wife. Charles Donovan rarely showed softness, but he loved his family in his own way. Still, his life was the company, the empire he had built from nothing but sharp instincts and a relentless hunger to win. Evelyn often felt like she had two fathers. The man who bought her ice cream after ballet recitals, and the man who barked orders on the phone while bodyguards waited in black SUVs. For Evelyn, the greatest blessing was that her mother taught her the value of love over money. She grew up believing she would choose her own path, one far away from boardrooms, contracts, and bloodthirsty ambition. That was why, when she met Richard Langford, she allowed herself to fall in love. Richard hadn't been anyone special when they first crossed paths. He worked as a mid-level sales manager at a luxury car dealership. He was charming, attentive, and hungry for success. At the time, Evelyn was volunteering at a literacy program in Chicago, trying to live a simple life away from her father's influence. She had introduced herself only as Evelyn, leaving out her last name, hoping for a connection based on sincerity. Richard pursued her with relentless energy. He sent flowers, planned romantic dinners, and spoke of dreams bigger than his paycheck. He admired her kindness, or so he claimed, and promised her that with him she would never feel alone. For a girl who had always felt like an accessory in her father's empire, Richard's attention felt intoxicating. Within a year they were married in a quiet ceremony, far from the flashbulbs and gossip columns. Evelyn believed she had finally carved out a life built on love, not power. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Richard kissed her forehead every morning before leaving for work. He held her hand in public, whispered about the future, and told her they would build a life greater than either of them had known. When Evelyn became pregnant, he cried tears of joy, holding her close as though nothing in the world could come between them. But slowly, the cracks began to show. Richard started working longer hours, attending client dinners that stretched until dawn. He grew impatient when Evelyn spoke about her doctor's appointments or when she asked him to slow down and simply be present. She told herself it was just stress, that he was working hard for their growing family. Then came the whispers, rumors about a woman named Vanessa Reed. Evelyn dismissed them at first. Richard would never do that, she told herself. Not to her, not to their child. But as the months passed, Richard grew colder. He criticized her appearance, her weight, the very things pregnancy made impossible to control. He complained about money, even though Evelyn had quietly supported him with funds her father had gifted her years ago. Her heart broke a little more each day. The man who once called her his everything now looked at her as if she were a burden. And Evelyn, raised to be strong but conditioned to love deeply, clung desperately to the hope that the man she married still existed beneath the arrogance. What Richard never knew was that Evelyn's weakness was also her greatest strength. She had chosen to hide her family name when they married, signing papers as Evelyn Donovan Langford, but rarely speaking of her lineage. Richard thought she was the daughter of a schoolteacher, modest, unconnected. He thought he had married a woman whose only power was her loyalty to him, and so he underestimated her. When Evelyn discovered his affair, she was devastated, but not just for herself. She feared for her unborn child. She imagined the world her baby would be born into, one where their father flaunted mistresses, where loyalty meant nothing, where humiliation was normal. That thought terrified her more than betrayal ever could. She tried to confront Richard gently at first, asking him if he was happy, if something had changed. He brushed her off, telling her she was hormonal, paranoid, even hysterical. His dismissiveness cut deeper than a knife. Evelyn had always been soft-spoken, a woman who avoided confrontation, but with every cruel word, Richard pushed her closer to the edge of discovering her true strength. By the time the gala arrived, Evelyn knew. She knew about Vanessa, the nights out, the lies. But still, she held on to hope that Richard would deny it, that he would fight for their marriage. That was why she went to the gala, even though her heart screamed not to. She went to test the truth, to see if her husband still recognized her as his wife, the mother of his child. What she found instead was a nightmare. Vanessa standing beside him, Richard ignoring her pain, the humiliation of being mocked, abandoned, and left to cry at another woman's feet. But humiliation has a strange power. It burns, yes, but it also hardens. That night, as Evelyn sobbed on the ballroom floor, something inside her shifted. She was not just a wife, not just a pregnant woman clinging to hope. She was the daughter of Charles Donovan, a man who had never lost a battle in his life. The blood in her veins reminded her that she was not powerless. She had a choice. She could walk away broken, or she could rise and make Richard pay for every tear he had caused. As Evelyn left the gala, escorted out by a sympathetic friend who shielded her from the cameras, she whispered a promise to her unborn child. "I will not let him destroy us. I will fight. I will protect you." What she didn't know was that her father had already seen the photographs of her humiliation. And Charles Donovan was not a man who allowed anyone to disgrace his family. By the next morning, the battle lines would be drawn, and Richard Langford would discover that the woman he scorned was not alone. She was the heir to an empire, and her father was preparing to bring him to his knees. The gala at the Langford Towers Hotel was supposed to be a celebration of triumph. At least, that was how Richard Langford had framed it. He called it a charity fundraiser. But everyone in Manhattan knew it was really his chance to parade his success, flaunt his wealth, and cement his place among the city's elite. The ballroom pulsed with extravagance, walls draped in velvet, crystal chandeliers glowing like molten gold, and servers gliding between tables with trays of champagne and foie gras. Politicians, socialites, and businessmen filled the hall, all eager to be seen in Richard's orbit. For him, the night was perfect. For Evelyn, it was a crucible. The moment she stepped through the grand double doors, silence rippled through the crowd. Her entrance wasn't dramatic, no fanfare, no spotlight, but the sight of her swollen belly, the unmistakable curve of motherhood beneath her gown, struck harder than any staged announcement could. People whispered, some with pity, others with cruel amusement. "There she is," murmured one woman behind her sequined mask. "The wife. And pregnant too," another man chuckled under his breath. "How awkward." Evelyn ignored them, holding her head as high as she could. Every step across the marble floor felt like walking through quicksand, dragging her deeper into humiliation. She could see Richard near the stage, his arm looped confidently around Vanessa Reed's slim waist. The younger woman glittered in her crimson dress, her smile sharp as a blade. Richard saw Evelyn. For the briefest moment, his confident mask slipped, but instead of shame, his eyes hardened with irritation, as though Evelyn were nothing more than an unwelcome guest crashing his party. He didn't let go of Vanessa. He didn't even step toward his wife. The crowd parted, giving Evelyn a path directly to him. The music faded as if the orchestra itself sensed the scandal unfolding. "Richard," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling but clear enough to carry. "Why?" The question shattered the room. The silence afterward was deafening. Vanessa tilted her head, her voice dripping with mockery. "Oh, sweetie, he doesn't owe you an explanation. Look at you, 6 months along and still clinging to a fantasy. He's moved on. You should too." Gasps swept across the ballroom. Evelyn's knees wobbled, her chest tight. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, as though shielding her baby from the cruelty aimed at her. She wanted Richard to defend her, to silence Vanessa, to show even the smallest shred of loyalty. But he said nothing. He only tightened his grip on Vanessa's waist. That was the moment Evelyn's body gave way. She sank, her tears splashing onto the marble floor. The image of her, pregnant, broken, weeping at another woman's feet, was captured by dozens of flashing cameras. Within hours, it would dominate headlines, hashtags, and gossip columns. The crowd erupted into whispers. Some shook their heads in sympathy. Others leaned forward, hungry for the spectacle. Evelyn's sobs echoed against the high ceilings, raw and agonizing. She felt stripped bare, betrayed not only by her husband but by the world that seemed to delight in her downfall. But humiliation has a strange way of revealing who truly stands with you. Not everyone in that room looked away. Evelyn caught sight of an older woman near the front table, a philanthropist she recognized from past events. The woman's eyes glistened with empathy, her hand pressed firmly over her heart. Evelyn realized then that not everyone thought she was weak. Some saw her pain and recognized her dignity. And yet, Richard leaned down and hissed, "Get up, Evelyn. You're embarrassing me. Go home." His words cut deeper than the whispers. She wanted to rise, to scream, but her body trembled too violently. Vanessa leaned closer, her voice low enough for only Evelyn to hear. "You'll never win, darling. He's mine now, and soon, so is everything else." Those words lodged in Evelyn's heart like poison. She clutched her purse tighter, her fingers brushing the ultrasound photo she always kept tucked inside. Her baby's tiny heartbeat, the one thing pure in her life, gave her strength to endure. She wiped her tears, forcing herself to breathe through the storm. The orchestra stumbled back into song, desperate to cover the scandal. Guests murmured excuses and turned away, though every eye still flickered toward the drama at the center of the ballroom. Evelyn, barely able to stand, pushed herself upright. Her pride, though battered, refused to let her remain on the floor. She whispered to herself, "Not here. Not like this." Richard smirked, mistaking her silence for surrender. He raised his glass of champagne high, as though to toast his own audacity. But Evelyn saw something else, a flicker of arrogance so blinding he didn't notice the trap forming around him. Because not far from the ballroom, another figure was already arriving. Black town cars lined up at the hotel entrance. Paparazzi outside turned their cameras from Evelyn's humiliation to the new arrival, a man whose name alone could silence Wall Street. Charles Donovan, CEO of Donovan Global Holdings, Evelyn's father, had just stepped out. He had seen the photographs streaming live across social media. He had seen his daughter on her knees, mocked, humiliated, betrayed. And Charles Donovan was not a man who forgave insults to his family. Inside, Evelyn did not yet know her father was near. She only knew that something inside her had shifted. For years she had tried to escape his world of power and control. But tonight, standing in a room where she was treated as worthless, she realized she would need every ounce of Donovan blood in her veins to survive. She lifted her chin, her tears drying, her eyes hardening into steel. The whispers in the room grew sharper, some mocking, some sympathetic. But Evelyn no longer cared. She was done begging for Richard's love. She was done clinging to illusions. Richard, smug and unaware of the storm about to descend, pressed a kiss to Vanessa's cheek in front of the crowd. Cameras exploded again, immortalizing his betrayal. He believed he had won, that Evelyn was defeated, powerless, humiliated beyond repair. But the night was far from over. Because in just a few hours, the same millionaire who had forced his wife to her knees would find himself dragged into a courtroom, standing before a judge, with Charles Donovan watching. And when that moment came, it would be Richard's turn to kneel. Richard Langford liked to call himself a self-made man. Born into a working-class family in Ohio, he clawed his way through community college, hustled in sales, and eventually carved out a career in luxury real estate and automobile dealerships. By 38, he had amassed a fortune that landed him on the radar of Manhattan's elite. But Richard's wealth was not the product of vision or innovation. It was the product of cunning shortcuts, charm weaponized as manipulation, and the ability to step on anyone who got in his way. He wore his ambition like armor. His perfectly tailored suits, his ever-changing fleet of sports cars, his townhouse overlooking Central Park, all of it screamed triumph. But beneath the polish, Richard was hollow. He craved validation more than love, applause more than loyalty. And in Vanessa Reed, he found the perfect mirror of his own hunger. Vanessa was 26, a former marketing intern at one of Richard's dealerships. Her background was modest, her ambitions anything but. With fiery auburn hair, a sharp laugh, and a figure that drew eyes the moment she entered a room, she knew how to wield her beauty like a weapon. She had grown up watching reality TV, studying the way women could rise to power not by merit but by visibility. When she met Richard, she saw more than a man. She saw an opportunity. To Richard, Vanessa was intoxicating. She made him feel young, powerful, desired. She flattered his ego in ways Evelyn never did, whispering promises of passion and adoration. But more importantly, she fed his hunger for status. Vanessa was bold, unafraid to flaunt herself in front of people who whispered disapproval. She pushed Richard to be reckless, to prove that no one, not even his pregnant wife, could dictate how he lived. "Why hide us?" she would tease, curling her arm around his in some dimly lit lounge. "If you're as powerful as you claim, then show the world. Let them see I'm the one you've chosen." And Richard, intoxicated by her fire, listened. He began to appear at public events with Vanessa on his arm, brushing off the murmurs, convincing himself that no one would dare challenge him. He forgot one crucial fact. His wife was not just Evelyn. She was Evelyn Donovan, daughter of Charles Donovan. But arrogance blinds. Behind closed doors, Richard often mocked his wife. "She's too soft," he told Vanessa one night as they lounged in a penthouse hotel suite. "She hides behind that quiet sweetness, but she doesn't have the spine to stand against me. She won't leave. She needs me." Vanessa smirked, sipping champagne. "Then why not finish it? Divorce her. Give her whatever she wants and let her disappear. You don't need her dragging you down." Richard shook his head. "No, divorce would tarnish my image. Investors like stability, the image of a family man. Besides," he smirked, tracing the stem of his glass, "she doesn't even know who she married. As long as she stays quiet, she's useful. She makes me look respectable while I live the life I want." It was this twisted logic that fueled him at the gala. Watching Evelyn weep only strengthened his ego. In his mind, her pain proved his power. She would endure humiliation, he told himself, because she had no other choice. What Richard did not realize was that every camera flash that night was documenting his downfall. Every whisper, every gasp, every photograph of Evelyn at Vanessa's feet was being uploaded, shared, dissected. What he saw as victory, the world saw as cruelty. Vanessa, for her part, reveled in the scandal. She leaned into the role of the mistress, smirking as Evelyn cried, basking in the stares of envy and outrage. To her, Evelyn wasn't a woman. She was an obstacle removed. "Did you see their faces?" Vanessa whispered to Richard later that evening as they slipped away to a private corner. "They were shocked, yes, but they'll get used to it. Soon, no one will remember her name. They'll only remember us." Richard chuckled, kissing her temple. "Exactly. By tomorrow, Evelyn will fade into the background. She's nothing compared to what we'll build." But he was wrong. Dead wrong. Because while Richard celebrated what he believed was his triumph, another man was already moving pieces against him. Charles Donovan had seen enough. He had tolerated his daughter's marriage out of respect for her wishes, but the photographs of her humiliation lit a fire he could no longer ignore. In his world, Image was currency, and Richard had just devalued the Donovan name in front of the entire city. That was not something Charles forgave. He was a strategist, a man who had turned hostile takeovers into an art form. And now, he was preparing for one far more personal. Meanwhile, Richard and Vanessa continued their descent into arrogance. They drank champagne, toasted to their freedom, and laughed about the chaos they had caused. Vanessa stretched luxuriously across the velvet sofa of Richard's penthouse, tracing lazy circles on his chest. "You're unstoppable," she purred. "No one can touch you. Not Evelyn, not her family, not anyone." Richard grinned, drunk on power. "You're right. I've got the money, the connections, the reputation. What could they possibly do?" Vanessa's laughter filled the room, a high, sharp sound that carried into the night. But as dawn crept over Manhattan, Richard would discover the answer to his own question. He could be touched. He could be destroyed. Because the one man he had underestimated, Charles Donovan, was already setting the stage. And the next time Richard walked into a room full of flashing cameras, it wouldn't be a gala, it would be a courtroom, with his father-in-law waiting to make him kneel. The photographs from the gala spread across Manhattan like wildfire. By dawn, tabloids screamed headlines that painted Richard Langford as a heartless adulterer. "Millionaire's pregnant wife humiliated at Mistress's feet," read one cover. Social media seethed with fury, women across the city condemning him, men shaking their heads at his arrogance. Richard laughed it off at first. "Scandals blow over," he told Vanessa the morning after. "By next week, no one will even remember." But he underestimated the power of the Donovan name. Because while Richard sipped champagne in his penthouse, Charles Donovan was already on the move. The CEO of Donovan Global Holdings was a man who rarely showed his face in public. When he did, stock markets trembled. His reputation was one of absolute dominance. Mergers crushed competitors, court cases bent in his favor, and politicians tread carefully in his presence. When Charles saw the image of his daughter on her knees, tears streaming down her face as Richard clung proudly to his mistress, something inside him snapped. He was not a sentimental man, but Evelyn was his blood, his only child. He would not allow anyone to disgrace her so publicly. By noon, Richard received the first summons. The letter arrived by courier, sealed with the crest of Donovan Global's legal department. Richard smirked as he opened it, expecting a financial threat he could brush off. But the contents drained the color from his face. It was a lawsuit, filed personally by Charles Donovan. The charges: emotional distress, public humiliation, and breach of marital responsibility, backed by evidence gathered from photographs, videos, and testimonies from gala attendees. "This is ridiculous," Richard muttered, pacing the marble floor of his penthouse. Vanessa perched on the sofa, her red lips curling into a smirk. "He's bluffing. He just wants to scare you." But Richard wasn't so sure. Because at the bottom of the letter was a line that made his stomach twist. "See you in court tomorrow morning. Bring your pride. It will be the last time you stand taller than my daughter." The next day, the courthouse steps swarmed with reporters. Flashbulbs exploded, microphones thrust forward as the crowd waited for the showdown. On one side, Richard arrived with Vanessa, both dressed to project confidence. He wore a tailored navy suit, his chin lifted high. Vanessa clung to his arm in a sleek black dress, her smirk daring anyone to challenge them. But then the crowd erupted. Black SUVs rolled to a stop. Security in sharp suits stepped out first, forming a protective barrier. Then came Charles Donovan. He emerged in a dark overcoat, his silver hair gleaming under the morning sun, his presence commanding absolute silence. Behind him walked Evelyn. Her steps were slow but steady, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She wore a simple but elegant ivory dress, her face calm, her eyes resolved. She was no longer the broken woman on the ballroom floor. She was her father's daughter. The cameras went wild. "Mrs. Langford, how do you feel about today's trial?" "Mr. Donovan, do you intend to ruin Richard Langford?" "Evelyn, are you filing for divorce?" Evelyn said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence, her posture, the quiet dignity in her gaze, all of it spoke louder than words. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Reporters filled the benches, whispering furiously. At the front, Judge Margaret Collins adjusted her glasses, clearly aware of the spectacle about to unfold. Richard sat with his attorney, his jaw tight, his hand gripping Vanessa's beneath the table. Across the aisle, Charles sat with Evelyn, a fortress of power and resolve. The proceedings began with the judge summarizing the charges. Richard's attorney leapt to his feet, scoffing. "Your Honor, this case is nothing more than a publicity stunt orchestrated by Mr. Donovan. Marriage disputes do not belong in this courtroom. We move to dismiss." But Charles Donovan leaned forward, his voice calm yet razor-sharp. "This is not about gossip. This is about accountability. My daughter was humiliated in front of hundreds of witnesses, her health jeopardized, her dignity stripped, and Mr. Langford laughed while she cried. The judge's gaze hardened. The evidence will be heard." And then came the photographs. Projected onto a large screen, the images filled the courtroom. Evelyn kneeling on the marble floor, tears streaming down her cheeks, while Richard clung proudly to Vanessa. The gasps from the audience were audible. Evelyn closed her eyes, her hand tightening on the ultrasound photo in her purse. She had lived through that moment once, and reliving it was agony. But she stayed strong. She owed it to herself, to her child, to every woman who had ever been told her pain was meaningless. Richard flushed crimson. He wanted to shout, to argue, but his attorney placed a hand on his arm, warning him to stay silent. Then Charles rose to speak. His voice carried through the room, steady and unyielding. "Mr. Langford claims to be a man of success, but a man who builds his empire on betrayal is nothing but a fraud. He has forgotten that a true legacy is measured not in wealth, but in how you treat those who trust you. Today, I demand not only justice for my daughter, but a reckoning for the arrogance that led him to believe he was untouchable." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. For the first time since the gala, she felt hope. Her father was not just fighting for her, he was fighting beside her. Richard tried to compose himself, whispering furiously to his lawyer. Vanessa squeezed his hand, but her eyes flickered with unease. The confidence she had flaunted at the gala now faltered in the face of Charles Donovan's wrath. The judge leaned forward. "This court will hear all evidence, and if the charges hold, Mr. Langford, you may very well lose more than your pride." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, Richard felt the icy grip of fear. And as the judge called for recess, Richard glanced toward Evelyn, only to realize she was no longer the woman he thought he could break. She was rising, and soon it would be his turn to fall. The courtroom emptied for recess, but Evelyn remained frozen in her chair. The weight of dozens of eyes, the whispers, the flashes from cameras, it all pressed down on her until she could barely breathe. She had thought she was ready for this day, prepared to face Richard and Vanessa without breaking, but the photographs projected on the courtroom screen had ripped her open again. It was one thing to live humiliation once. It was another to see it magnified before strangers, dissected like evidence at a crime scene. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse, the ultrasound photo inside pressing against her fingers like a reminder of why she had to endure this. Yet doubt seeped into her veins. Could she really survive this war? Could she fight Richard, fight the tabloids, fight the judgment of the world, all while carrying a child inside her? She whispered under her breath, "I'm so tired." Her father, Charles Donovan, leaned closer. His face, usually hard as stone, softened for just a moment. "You are not alone," he said quietly. "Remember that." But Evelyn wasn't sure, because when the cameras turned off and the journalists went home, it would be her lying awake at night, her heart pounding, her body aching. It would be her carrying the scars of this battle, not Charles. She excused herself, walking slowly to the restroom. The mirror reflected a pale, exhausted woman with dark circles under her eyes and shoulders weighed down by grief. She barely recognized herself. Where was the girl who had once believed in love? Where was the young woman who thought she could build a simple, happy life? A wave of nausea hit, stronger than morning sickness. She clutched the sink, breathing hard, her tears spilling onto the porcelain. Memories flooded her mind. Richard holding her hand at their wedding, whispering promises of forever. Richard laughing as he painted the nursery walls yellow, saying it was the color of sunshine. Richard placing his hand on her belly when they first heard the heartbeat. How could the man who once adored her now look at her as though she was worthless? She slid down the tiled wall, her gown pooling around her, sobs racking her body. Maybe he's right, she whispered. Maybe I am nothing without him. But then her baby kicked, a sharp, undeniable reminder of life within her. Evelyn placed both hands on her belly, closing her eyes. Her tears slowed. No, she whispered again, stronger this time. I can't give up. Not for me, for you. Still, fear gnawed at her. Fear of losing the case. Fear of being crushed by Richard's arrogance. Fear of the whispers that she was weak, fragile, undeserving. When she returned to the courtroom hallway, Vanessa was waiting. The mistress leaned casually against the wall, her arms folded, a wicked smile curling her lips. Rough morning? She asked sweetly. Evelyn froze. You know, you should really think about your stress levels, Vanessa continued, her tone dripping with venom. It's not good for the baby. Maybe you should just back down, let Richard go. He's mine now, and you know it. Why embarrass yourself further? Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to strike, to defend herself. But all she could do was whisper, "You won't win." Vanessa laughed. "Darling, I already have." The words clung to Evelyn like poison as she returned to her seat. She felt her resolve crumbling. She was losing the strength to fight. She wanted to run, to escape the pain, to disappear into anonymity where no one would know her name or her shame. When the judge re-entered and called the court back into session, Evelyn sat stiff, her hands clasped tightly together. Richard smirked across the aisle. Vanessa's hand looped through his arm, her smugness radiating. Evelyn's vision blurred again. Her father spoke with authority. Her lawyers presented evidence. But the sound was muffled, distant. All she could hear was the thundering of her own heart and the echo of Vanessa's cruel laugh. Hours dragged on. By the time the judge adjourned for the day, Evelyn's body felt broken. She allowed herself to be guided out of the courtroom by her father's security team. But inside, she was unraveling. That night, back at her apartment, she sat in the nursery that Richard had once painted. The walls still glowed faintly yellow, though the paintbrush strokes were uneven, careless, much like his love. She sat in the rocking chair, her hands resting on her belly, the silence deafening. "Maybe they're right," she whispered to her unborn child. "Maybe I can't do this. Maybe I don't have the strength." Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. A message from an unknown number. She hesitated, then opened it. It read, "Do not break. Tomorrow everything changes, trust me." Her breath caught. She didn't know who it was from. Was it her father's team? Was it someone inside the courtroom? Her fear wrestled with a flicker of hope. Could it be true? Could everything change tomorrow? Evelyn leaned back in the chair, closing her eyes. She had reached the lowest point, her spirit nearly broken. But deep inside, a small flame still flickered. Perhaps tomorrow would fan it into fire. Because when morning came, Evelyn would discover a secret that would not only shift the trial, but give her the power to rise, and finally bring Richard to his knees. The morning after Evelyn nearly broke in the nursery, Manhattan awoke to a new storm. Headlines screamed updates from the courtroom. Talk shows debated her humiliation, and paparazzi camped outside her building. She sat in silence, sipping tea she barely tasted, her mind replaying the message she had received the night before. "Do not break. Tomorrow, everything changes. Trust me." At 9 o'clock sharp, Charles Donovan arrived at her apartment. He rarely came without an entourage, but today he entered alone, his sharp eyes scanning his daughter carefully. "You didn't sleep," he observed. "No," Evelyn admitted. Charles placed a folder on the table between them. His tone softened, but his words carried weight. "You've been fighting with your heart, Evelyn. But Richard doesn't understand hearts. He understands power. It's time you remind him who you are." Evelyn hesitated. "Dad, I don't want to be you. I don't want to fight with intimidation and money. That's not who I am." Charles studied her for a long moment, then tapped the folder. "This isn't about becoming me. It's about protecting yourself, protecting your child. Open it." Her fingers shook as she lifted the cover. Inside were documents, financial records, property transfers, and contracts. But one sheet froze her breath. A hidden prenuptial agreement signed years ago. Her eyes widened. This can't be. I thought we never." Charles nodded. "You signed it quietly at your mother's insistence. She wanted you protected, even if you didn't realize it. And Richard? He signed too. He thought it was just another paper among dozens on your wedding day. But it's valid. And it changes everything." Evelyn's heart pounded. The agreement was clear. In the event of infidelity or public humiliation, Richard forfeited not only financial claims, but any stake in the Donovan family's network of investments. He wouldn't just lose Evelyn. He'd lose everything he had built on her name. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't from despair. They were from relief, from the realization that for once, the power was hers. Charles's voice was steady. You have a choice. We can use this quietly, settle behind closed doors. Or you can stand in that courtroom, look him in the eye, and remind him that you are not the weak woman he thinks you are. Evelyn closed the folder, her resolve hardening. No more hiding. He humiliated me in public. I will answer him in public. That day, when she stepped out of the black SUV at the courthouse, the crowd gasped. Evelyn was transformed. Gone was the pale, trembling woman in soft colors. She wore a sharp navy dress that hugged her frame with elegance. Her hair swept back, her eyes lined with determination. At her side, her father walked like a general leading his heir. Reporters shouted questions. Mrs. Langford, are you prepared to end your marriage? Evelyn, are the rumors about a prenup true? Do you plan to take Richard's fortune? Evelyn paused at the steps, her hand resting on her belly, and for the first time she spoke clearly into the microphones. This isn't about money. This is about dignity. No woman should ever be made to kneel for the sake of a man's pride. Today, I stand for myself and for my child. The crowd erupted in applause, a roar that followed her into the courtroom. Inside, Richard's confidence faltered. He hadn't expected her transformation. He sneered at Vanessa, whispering, "It's just a show. She can't touch me." But when Evelyn's lawyer produced the prenuptial agreement, Richard's smugness cracked. His face drained of color, his mouth opening in disbelief. "That's impossible," he muttered. "I destroyed it. The judge's gavel struck. Order in the court. The document was passed to the bench. Judge Collins scanned it, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up. "This agreement is valid and binding. Mr. Langford, you knowingly violated its terms. The consequences are clear." Gasps filled the room. Vanessa's grip on Richard's arm tightened, her smirk gone. Reporters scribbled furiously. Richard shot to his feet. "This is a trick. She's lying. I burned it. There was only one copy." Charles Donovan rose slowly, his voice calm but laced with steel. "You thought you destroyed it, Richard, but you never understood that in my family we don't play games we cannot win. Evelyn was protected long before you knew her name." Evelyn stood then, her voice steady. "You humiliated me, Richard. You mocked me, abandoned me, made me believe I was nothing. But I am not nothing. I am a Donovan, and today I reclaim my dignity." The room erupted. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed, and Richard's attorney buried his face in his hands. For the first time, Richard realized he was cornered. Not by Evelyn's tears, but by her strength. Not by his mistress's promises, but by the contract he had underestimated. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Langford, you will abide by the terms of this agreement. You have no claim to your wife's fortune, no leverage over her or her child. What remains to be decided is the degree of damages owed for your actions." Richard collapsed back into his seat, his confidence shattered. Vanessa turned her face away, unwilling to be photographed with a man suddenly stripped of his power. Evelyn felt her baby kick, as if cheering from within. For the first time in months, she smiled. Not a smile of victory, but of freedom. But the battle was not yet finished. Because while Richard had been cornered legally, Charles Donovan had one more demand, and it would force Richard to kneel before the world, not just in court, but in shame. The courtroom was silent. The air seemed heavy with the weight of revelation. Richard Langford sat pale and shaken, Vanessa stiff beside him, her carefully constructed poise dissolving into fear. Across the aisle, Evelyn Donovan sat taller than she ever had, her hands steady on her belly, her father's silent strength radiating at her side. But Charles Donovan wasn't finished. He had promised himself that Richard would not simply lose money or reputation. He would lose the very thing he had tried to steal from Evelyn, her dignity. When the judge confirmed the validity of the prenuptial agreement, Charles rose slowly, his voice filling the chamber. "Your Honor, while the law has spoken on Richard Langford's financial forfeiture, there remains the matter of public accountability. He humiliated my daughter before hundreds of witnesses. He mocked her pregnancy, treated her tears as entertainment, and paraded his mistress as if vows meant nothing. If he believes his arrogance will end here, he is wrong. This family demands a formal apology, not whispered behind closed doors, but spoken in this courtroom, before the world. The crowd gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously. Richard's attorney leapt to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Public humiliation is not a legal sentence. Judge Collins raised a hand. Sit down, counselor. While I cannot mandate humiliation, I can strongly recommend Mr. Langford offer restitution in the form of an apology as a demonstration of remorse. If he refuses, I will take his unwillingness into account during sentencing. All eyes turned to Richard. Sweat beaded at his forehead. His jaw clenched. He had built his entire life on pride, on appearing untouchable. To kneel now, to beg forgiveness before cameras, it was a fate worse than bankruptcy. But then his gaze flicked to Vanessa. She was staring at him, her expression cold, detached. For the first time, he saw not desire in her eyes, but calculation. She was already distancing herself, already imagining a future without him. Richard's chest tightened. He realized he was utterly alone. Evelyn stood, her voice steady but sharp as glass. Richard, I never asked for your fortune. I never asked for your empire. I only ever asked for respect, and you denied me that. Today, you will give me what you took. You will give me back my dignity. Not for me alone, but for every woman who has been forced to bow while a man stood proud over her pain. The room erupted in applause before the judge banged her gavel for silence. Cameras clicked furiously. The pressure was unbearable. Richard rose slowly, his knees trembling. His pride screamed against it, but the weight of the judge's glare, the reporters' pens, and the Donovan name pressing down on him left no escape. He sank to his knees. The crowd gasped, then went utterly still. Richard's voice cracked as he spoke, the words tasting like poison. Evelyn, I am sorry, for the lies, for the betrayal, for the humiliation. I was wrong. I see that now. I humiliated you, and in doing so I destroyed myself. Evelyn's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She did not pity him. She did not forgive him. She only nodded once, calm and resolute. You are sorry because you were caught, but I accept your apology, not for you but for me, because I will no longer carry your shame. The courtroom thundered with applause, the sound of justice echoing off marble walls. Vanessa slipped her arm from Richard's grasp, her heels clicking sharply as she left the courtroom. Cameras followed her, but her face burned with disgrace. Her golden ticket had crumbled into ashes. The judge's final ruling stripped Richard of financial claims, barred him from Donovan Investments, and ordered restitution for emotional damages. By the time he staggered out of the courtroom, his fortune was collapsing, his reputation shattered. Evelyn walked past him without a glance, her father at her side. Reporters shouted questions, but she paused only once on the courthouse steps. Her voice carried strong and clear. Women are not weak. We are not accessories to be discarded when inconvenient. We are stronger than the men who try to break us. Today, I stood not just for myself, but for every woman who has been silenced. Let this be a reminder. Dignity cannot be stolen. It can only be surrendered, and I will never surrender mine again. The crowd roared. Headlines that evening no longer painted her as a victim. She was a warrior, a survivor, a symbol of strength. That night, back in her apartment, Evelyn sat once more in the nursery, but this time she wasn't broken. She rocked gently in the chair, her hand on her belly, whispering to her unborn child. We did it. We're free, and we'll build a life filled with love, not lies. Her father entered quietly, his presence softer than she had ever felt. Your mother would be proud, he said simply. Evelyn smiled faintly. I didn't think I had her strength. Charles shook his head. You had it all along. You just needed to see it. The baby kicked, and Evelyn laughed through her tears. For the first time in a long time, they were tears of joy. The city outside still buzzed with scandal, but inside her home, there was peace. Richard had fallen, Vanessa had vanished, and Evelyn had risen. And as the night settled, she whispered one final promise to herself and her child. We will never kneel again. So my wonderful friends, if you're still here, it means this story touched your heart. Remember, as Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. True dignity comes from within. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep growing stronger together.